If you do not have somebody in your stores helping to introduce your product to the customer walking through the door, you can bet that your competitor does, right? You need to come up with a plan to have in-store ambassadors who go and not only educate the staff at these stores about your brands, but they create excitement. They create a feeling of like, oh my gosh, when this person isn't in the store, they're still remembering your brand because of how that person made them feel.
This is Off the Shelf, where we take the most iconic beauty brands, products, and people in the beauty industry off the shelf and examine the stories behind the story. It's where beauty is treated like the economic, cultural, and power-building force it really is. I'm Susannah Dellinger, and here we're going to talk about what really shapes the industry, who holds the power, how decisions get made, and what it actually takes to build, scale, and quite frankly, survive in beauty. These are the conversations happening behind closed doors about money, relationships, risk, and cult moments. If you're building, breaking through, or trying to understand how beauty really works, or just love a really good story, you're in the right place.
Welcome back to Off the Shelf. I'm Susannah Dellinger, your host. Today, we're going to dive into what it really means to have a brand launch off the shelf. It is incredible how many times people, brands especially, think that the hardest part about launching a beauty brand is making it into a retailer. That the lottery moment is when you get the call from a major retailer like Sephora or Ulta or Nordstrom that says, yes, you're going to be on our shelves, you're going to be in our stores. Hallelujah. Now you can go print money, honey. If only that were the case about how the beauty industry works. It's fun fact, most beauty brands are not profitable for up to 3 years, if not more, in retail. So much so that some of the incubators that have been launched by our favorite retailers like Sephora and Ulta even include pieces of programming for these brand founders that are in these retainers on how to raise money to be in retail because it takes so much investment. Whether it's what's called the gondolas that are the displays of where these brands are, if they have a huge gondola in Ulta, or even the merchandising that brands do on just a wall in a Sephora or an Ulta, let alone the production. Think about it. There's 1,200 Ultas in the country. So if you get a purchase order that says, oh my gosh, congratulations, you're now in, let's just say even 300 Ulta stores, the capital that a brand has to put up to even produce enough product sometimes to roll out into these 300 stores and online is quite an investment. So that's why moving your brand off the shelf and having a high sell-through is so important. So often we see at my agency brands that will say, you know what? We're in Sephora. We have amazing marketing, social media planned. We know based on our .com sales and how loyal our client is that we're easily going to meet these sales goals, that we're easily going to crush it. We're going to talk about what actually happens in beauty retailer when a shopper comes in so you can understand how retail works. And then we're going to dive into how brands can embrace that to really become an off-the-shelf brand. So think about it. Here's how beauty retail works. The average shopper will walk in because they saw something nowadays online. Maybe their favorite influencer talked about something. Maybe they were served an ad for something. Maybe a friend told them about a great product when they were out together. Whatever the reason is, they're typically walking into an Ulta, Sephora, Nordstrom, Bluemercury, you name it, with a product in mind. Now, once you walk into that retailer, you're greeted typically by somebody in the store. Most people from the outside would think that that is a store employee, an Ulta employee or a Sephora employee, when in fact, they're typically brand-owned representatives. Ulta, Sephora, even Bluemercury, Nordstrom, etc., ask brands to have field teams in their stores. These people are in store to educate on the brands, to showcase the brand, and to help sell the brand. If you have 200 plus brands in a Sephora, if you have 300 plus brands in an Ulta, think about how many brand reps are probably going to be in on a busy weekend. You're going to have half a dozen, if not more, depending on the time of year. So now you're walking in with this great product in mind that you saw online or from your friend, and you see somebody dressed all in black come up and ask you what you're looking for, and you're going to say the name of the product. That person is going to say, well, what do you like about that particular product. And that is the start of how they line switch. You're going to say, oh my gosh, well, I love how it concealed my friend's under eyes, or I saw how it completely vanished, dark circles. Now, this rep probably works for a competing brand. And they're going to say, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you need. This product is actually going to perform better. And they're going to walk you over like the little Pied Piper to whatever brand they currently represent. And they're going to introduce you to their product. And you're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And now, despite all that money that a brand spent on maybe social media or targeted ads or influencer marketing, you're walking out of the retailer without their product, right? So that is a big, big lesson for brands that think their social media marketing, et cetera, is going to move the dial. If you do not have somebody in your stores helping to introduce your product to the customer walking through the door, you can bet that your competitor does. Right? So let's say you're a brand that doesn't necessarily have social media marketing or influencer marketing, and you've been told by your buyer at Ulta, Sephora, wherever you're launching, that don't worry about it, just focus on education. Education means two completely different things. Some brands believe that education means, oh, great, we're going to share about our brand in that retailer's online education portal. And now all of the employees at the retailer are going to know about my brand and want to sell my brand. Have we talked about how many brands are in these retailers? The chances of them retaining that information, let alone them actually watching the videos that you as a brand upload or reading the training, let alone remembering it when a client comes in looking for something, are so slim. You have to have in-person education. So if you have the ability, like Jeff Lee, co-founder of Dibs, launched in Ulta and committed to flying to all 50 states in 1 year and visiting Ultas in every single state where they were launched and sharing his message and sharing about the brand, that's incredible. If you have the time and the resources to do that. Otherwise, you need to come up with a plan to have in-store ambassadors who go and not only educate the staff at these stores about your brands, but they create excitement. They create a feeling of like, oh my gosh, when this person isn't in the store, they're still remembering your brand because of how that person made them feel. We've all heard the phrase and the quote over and over again that people will forget what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And nothing is more true in beauty retail. There's a reason why many brands, including my own agency, will take in donuts, cupcakes, throw pizza parties, silly things that may seem surface level, but when you feed a staff at a store, they remember you. They remember your product. If you do something so small level as just saying, okay, we're going to invest and make sure that we have teams for the first 90 days of our launch going in to our top 30 retailers at least every other week and taking them in cupcakes and some little treats and reiterating our core brand messaging, you are going to win because the retailer will remember you. It is not this big, huge marketing plan secret that agencies like mine have or that top selling beauty lines have. It is how you create movement and how you create culture. It's by how you make teams feel. Now, if you want to play in the big leagues, now that's going to be how you make your community at large feel beyond just your retailer. How are you going to show up in that retailer and create a community moment? Think outside of, okay, a brand is going to send in a makeup artist and we're going to do makeovers for the day. It's not 1995, right? Like that's not exciting for most people. You're doing really cool things. People are going to show up in store. Think about how Goop, Gwyneth Paltrow's brand, just did a pop-up yoga situation in Nordstrom, New York City, Nordstrom's flagship store. The person who oversees Goop, she is actually a certified yoga teacher, and she decided that she was going to teach a free class in Nordstrom, a free yoga class to help people calm and get centered that had nothing to do with beauty. They didn't do many facials. They didn't do touch-ups. They literally just had people come for free with their yoga mats in community in the middle of Manhattan. People remember moments like that. Brands can do cooking classes. Brands can do author book signings. Anything that your community is into. If you are not obsessed with what your community is obsessed with, you're going to lose. It can't be, oh, we just launched a strawberry lip gloss, so now we're going to have strawberry sherbet passed out on the corner of the street in front to have this big strawberry moment. That was marketing back in, the mid 2000s, and that worked. But nobody remembers it anymore. What they remember is when you bring people together. I talk about it a lot on this podcast. I talk about community. I talk about how we live in a trust recession where people no longer believe most of what they see, most of what they read in this era of AI, in this era of retouched, filtered, etc. People are no longer trusting their own eyes. They want to see it in person. And what builds trust? It's when you bring people together and you don't treat them like a bank. You don't treat them like an audience. Community and audience are two very different things that we could dive into here. But when you treat them like actual community and you're obsessed with them and you care about them and you want to connect with them, you're going to win. And you need to have that mindset when you're launching a brand is how do I build micro communities on a national scale? What your customer in Boston cares about might vary wildly from what your customer in Seattle to LA to Chicago. You have to think about what their daily lives are, what their community centers are, and how they like to show up. You cannot rinse and repeat across the entire United States. And that brings me to the neglect of the middle of the country that many beauty brands do. Too often, we have companies and brands, not just in the beauty industry, but in the world at large, that think that there are two cities that make up the United States, New York and Los Angeles. I would actually like to say that New York and Los Angeles do not represent most of the United States. They are wildly different animals. If you live in the middle of Manhattan, your life, your community desires, how you show up in the world is very, very different than the rest of the world. If you live in Los Angeles, that's wildly different as well. You have to treat your brand as a nationwide or even global brand. If you figure out how to show up in North Dakota at the same type of level that you show up in Texas, at the same type of level as you show up in Florida, it's the same type of level that you show up in New York and California, then you create true culture. And also, here's a little tidbit for brands that are just launching in retail. Buyers want to see you win across the country. It's one thing to win in Manhattan. It's one thing to win in Los Angeles. But if you can win in Columbus, Ohio, if you can win in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Dallas, Texas, you have something that becomes much more economically sound. If you win in across states that are not as impacted by economic shifts, by national layoffs, by even weather, right? If you're only winning in New York and there's a snowstorm, you're not going to have sales for 2 weeks. If you're only winning in Los Angeles and God forbid there's a fire, you have a problem. God forbid there's a writer's strike or an actor's strike and you have a localized recession. You have to think about diversification of where your community is. And that is wildly different than knowing what your social media marketing is, right? Knowing how to show up in person and connect is the secret ingredient to launching a brand that will actually be off the shelf and in community. So let's talk about how you can build community beyond the four walls of a retailer. And to do that, I'm going to take you back to 2008. Not anybody's favorite time in the economy, that is for sure. I was a beauty executive for a global French beauty brand, makeup artist-driven brand, and our largest retailers were Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue. They were 100% hit the hardest out of most retail. And I will never forget standing at the time in Saks Fifth Avenue in Atlanta in Buckhead, Georgia, at a $1 million counter. So just that one brand alone in that one store produced $1 million a year. And thinking to myself, we could actually have a whole volleyball game in this retailer right now because there's not a single person in here. We wouldn't hit anybody. And that was a staggering moment of realization that you cannot count on customers walking in through doors. That's just not how retail works. You have to find where your customer actually is. And what we started to dig into across the country, we looked at Charlotte, we looked at Atlanta, we looked at different areas of the country that typically had much larger sales. And we realized that many of our favorite customers, many of our favorite year-round gals and guys that shop the brand no longer felt comfortable being seen showing up to Neiman Marcus and shopping. That even if they weren't affected by all the layoffs, that somebody they knew was affected. People in their community, people that they're friends with, and they didn't want to be seen just showing up being like, oh, I'm going to spend a couple $100s on beauty products today. It just felt kind of off and icky to them. But what they did feel comfortable with was still having people over and having parties. And so we took a page out of kind of the Mary Kay Avon playbook for this very prestigious high-end French company. And we started to do home parties. We called, and Charlotte and Atlanta were the two biggest ones. And we called our top clients. We had the team members that worked at the store. And we said, hey, we'd love to come and just pamper you at home. And we also want to raise money for a charity that you care about. And we took the opportunity to get to know our customer and get to know what they cared about. And we offered 10% back of the sales generated from parties, little fun makeup parties in their home, back to a charity of their choice. It could be a school that was raising money. It could be a women's shelter that they were involved with. Whatever they were interested in, the company would cut a check for 10% of what was generated. And it turns out in 2008 and 2009, people really loved shopping at home. They loved the idea that they could be relaxed. They loved to have a little drink. They loved to be with their friends. It was a whole moment that you couldn't really replicate in store. So when we really dug in and figured out what does our community want and what do they care about from a charitable aspect, we were off to the races. In 1 year alone, we did over $1 million worth of parties in people's homes. And then we took it a step further and we reached out to local garden clubs and women's organizations and different places that are always looking for fun, new things for their members. And I'll never forget, I was at another brand by this point. It was in Naples, Florida. And there was a country club in Naples and it's called La Playa. And they had reached out to Nordstrom that they wanted to do something special for their members. And we hosted a class in the store, just like a typical fun little master class in Nordstrom. And these women bought literally everything that was on our shelf. And I walked up to the person in charge, Sandy Cotter, afterwards. And I said, I am Susannah Dellinger, and I cannot wait to do more events with you. And she said, honey, what if you came to the club? There are so many members that just don't want to drive to the mall. And I said, tell me the day. And we went and we did a masterclass at their actual club. And in about 90 minutes, we sold $35,000 worth of product. That showed me so much in such a little amount of time that when you show up to where people want to be and how they want to shop and can create an experience, you really get to know your community better. I'm not saying you have to, go to people's homes and go to country clubs and really invest in that way, because that was a large amount of, travel, it was a large amount of manpower. We took a makeup artist. I think that one event where we did 35,000, I had a team of 9 with me in Naples, Florida that we had to fly in and put up in hotels, etc. However, figure out, where does your community hang out? We talked earlier about, you could host a cooking class or a book signing in a retailer, or you could find a local bookstore and do your event there. You could find a local restaurant and host a fun farm-to-table event. Get outside of the retailer and figure out where your community likes to hang out that is not the actual Sephora or Ulta or Nordstrom, and do events for them without the expectation necessarily to sell in that moment, but to generate interest and drive customers back into the store after. These conversations matter because who gets to speak shapes who gets to win. If this episode challenged how you see beauty, business, or the power behind the industry, share it with someone who needs to hear it. To connect or explore more, check the show notes. I'm Susannah Dellinger, and this has been Off the Shelf.